Hi, everybody. This week you're going to be reading about the Counter Reformation or the Catholic Reformation. This was the Catholic Church's response to the Protestant Reformation. And it kind of started with the Council of Trent. And at the Council of Trent, they tried to invite the other leaders of the Reform movements. And the idea was maybe we can sit down and talk through the different complaints and finalize, some decisions and try to reunite as a religion. But no one came from those other religious groups, and so the Catholics who were left there discussed the different complaints that the reformers made. And in the end, they almost, in most cases, just reaffirmed some of the teachings in the church. A couple things, however, did change. One thing was the end to the selling of indulgences, which was a good thing. Another thing was a little bit more uniformity in the preparation for priests. That was kind of a clear complaint across the board that there was some corruption in the priesthood. Also, there was an attempt to kind of solidify or make what happened in the church uniform. And so they made the language of the Mass Latin, and they kind of mandated that everyone say the same things. And so they came up with a form of the Mass that was said everywhere across the world in the same language so that people couldn't criticize the church of being inconsistent. And this was good in some regards, but not so good in other regards, because obviously if you're sitting in a church hearing the Mass in Latin, you don't always understand everything that's happening or what they're saying, and it would be ideal for a congregation to know what's being said. But on the other side, no one can criticize you for being inconsistent or doing things differently. And so they kind of erred on the side of caution. Another thing that happened at the Council of Trent was that they affirmed the 7 sacraments of the Catholic Church. And we still recognize those same sacraments today. Otherwise, they basically just said, well, they think this, but we still believe this, and just solidified that. So for the next 400 years, nothing changed basically in the church, in the way church was ran, in the teachings of the church, and the different liturgies and ceremonies in the church. A couple people that you'll read about this week that are important. One of them is St. Ignatius of Loyola. He was a soldier who was injured in a battle, and he ended up in a hospital bed for about a year. And to fill his time, I should have said he's from Spain, but to fill his time, he decided to read about the lives of the saints. And so as he was reading the lives of the saints, he really had a conversion experience, and he decided to become a priest. And one thing he really believed was that there was a lot of value that came from contemplation. And he also thought that in our lives, our daily life, there are moments of consolation and desolation. And the moments of consolation are kind of the high points, desolation are kind of the low points. And he's found a lot of spiritual reward to just focusing on where you're at, and if thinking about those high points and those low points in your day, and trying to kind of address where you're failing, try to be a better person the next day. And so his kind of thinking about spirituality became known as the spiritual exercises. And one of his spiritual exercises is the daily examen, which is a wonderful prayer. It would ideally be prayed at the end of each day. And you sit and invite Jesus to sit with you. And then you would think back over the last 24 hours. Think about first all of the moments you want to thank God for. And then you go back through the same 24 hours and you look at it very honestly. And you look for the moments where you kind of failed to be your best self. And then you have a little heart-to-heart conversation with Jesus about the goals that you have for yourself for the next 24 hours. And then you kind of set those goals, and then you say goodbye to Jesus. And that's a really beautiful prayer that anyone could do at the end of each day. Another person that you're going to read about is St. Teresa of Avila. And her story is kind of interesting. She was a Carmelite nun. And the Carmelites at the time were in a cloister, but they also lived a pretty easy lifestyle. They had a fair amount of money, and they didn't live totally simply or in total poverty or anything like that. And St. Teresa of Avila said that she really didn't feel like she had a significant religious experience until she was about 40 years old. And from then, she had some mystical kind of experiences. And she wrote about her faith and theology in a book called The Interior Castle. And in that book, she basically describes our souls kind of like a castle with many different rooms. And we're always trying to get closer and closer to that center room, which is closest to God. Another important person that you'll read about is Our Lady of Guadalupe and Juan Diego. And so this was very important to the conversion of Mexico. But basically, Juan Diego was a simple man, and he was walking one day, and Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared to him. And she asked him to keep coming back to this site, which he did most days. One day he didn't. He said he couldn't stay because his uncle was very sick. And Our Lady of Guadalupe said, when you get home, your uncle's going to be all better, which happened. Another time, so she kept telling him to go to the bishop and tell the bishop that he was seeing her. And one time when he visited the bishop, he said, I'm not going to believe you unless you bring me back a sign. And so Juan Diego told that to Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so she said, here's a bunch of flowers that would never grow in the winter. Collect all these and put them inside your cloak, or your tilma, as they called it. And hold them, and when you get there, open up your cloak and show the bishop these flowers that couldn't grow normally in the winter. So he collected up all these flowers and he took them to the bishop. And when he got there, he opened up his tilma, and all the flowers fell to the ground. And on the tilma was kind of like a etching or a painting of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And no one could really explain how it got there, but it is still there on that cloth. And you could see that cloth if you visit the cathedral in Mexico City. And I think when Mexican people go there, they drop to their knees and they kind of crawl into the church as a sign of humility. And, today or since that time, the majority of Mexico, like 95% of Mexico, is Catholic. So those are a couple people you're going to read about. Again, this is after the Reformation and the kind of events that occurred after that point in time. This week there is a discussion question. It's due Tuesday and then a response by Thursday. And I hope that it's a pretty easy week for you and that you have some time to spend with family as you approach Easter. So have a very blessed Easter.